by people who people know, by men who the women know. And guns, we know, does not protect against domestic violence. In fact, it makes it worse. So we're living in a culture of fear, where we are taught now that getting almost buck naked in the airports will help keep us safe. We now are taught that anything less than 3 ounces is the latest talisman for safety. I watched this year in the orientation as the new faculty were being oriented, and how they were led to not trust themselves in this orientation. There were so many procedures that they needed to follow in case there was something dangerous going on in the classroom, that they had stopped being able to believe in their own intuition about how to de-escalate a problem. Because most problems can be de-escalated. And yet when we're taught that what's going to protect us is if there is a phone in the room or if there is a police officer standing outside, we're losing our own abilities to say, what do I need to do here? There was no faith that they could handle a crisis, that they could de-escalate the situation. And all kinds of people became the dangerous ones there, which were codes in this colorblind blindness. So what do we know about these socially induced traumas? And the 4 that I'm talking about mostly are Hurricane Katrina, the Columbine Massacre, the Abu Ghraib prison abuses, and 9/11. They came to us like wasps. It's not just one sting, but another and another and another. So fast, so quickly, that we haven't begun to understand the enormity of these. So I look to the literature, particularly the psychoanalytic literature, that will help us understand about traumas. And we know from that literature that until issues are resolved, integrated, and healed from, they manifest themselves in sideways directions. They will hit us from behind, catch us off guard. We are destined to relive what we do not yet understand. There was a recent article in the New York Times about a book called The Forever War, and the reviewer, Robert Stone, said, every army fights the previous war. We are fighting in Vietnam now, in Iraq, because we have not come to terms with Vietnam. The psychoanalytic scholar Dory Lobb writes that in working with Holocaust survivors, there are 2 Holocausts that need to be survived. The first, imprisonment, and the second, another trauma. It could be a fire, it could be the loss of a loved one, it could be an illness that triggers and reopens the first. All of the traumas that Diane and I talk about in When the Center is on Fire revolve around white supremacy. All the ones I just said. For example, the Columbine Massacre. And the vast majority of school shootings have occurred in overwhelmingly white towns where there is virtually no room for outsiders, for the geeks, for the goths, for the nerds, for the gay kids. In Littleton, Colorado, everybody was white. So the way the pecking order went could not be based on race. So it was based on other things. That pecking order is the problem itself. When the 2 young men shot their classmates, before that, they left tapes. And they talked about, in these tapes, the rage that they felt inside for always being left out. Now, I'm not in any way justifying the way they dealt with that rage, but I am saying that living in a society based on white supremacy is incalculable in terms of the damage that's being done to all of us. Abu Ghraib prison abuses is right out of the history of lynching. Right out of the history of lynching. But it's 21st century style this time, with a white woman dominatrix still being controlled by a white man who year after year after year was training her toward that abuse. We also know from psychoanalytic work that the witness to trauma comes to be a participant and a co-owner of that traumatic event. Through the listening, we come to own part of the trauma itself. So I think about Martha Collins' brave book of poetry called The Blue Front, that's based on the story of her father, a little white boy, witnessing a lynching in his town when he was growing up. He became part of the trauma that it took the daughter to go back and start to write about. Children of mothers who are beaten become part of the trauma. They are traumatized as well. Under white supremacy, no one goes unscathed. This is not new information. Du Bois told us this in 1903. Morrison told us this in Playing in the Dark. James Baldwin told us this in much of his work. Mab Segrist has told us this in Memoir of a Race Traitor and Born to Belonging. In the Abu Ghraib prison abuses, there were several parties involved. There were those who were tortured, whose voices we have yet to hear at all. And then there were those who did the torture. Some of their voices we have heard. And then there were the millions and millions of the people witnessing the torture. Through the internet, those numbers have increased exponentially. Many, therefore, were re-traumatized at the time. I'm talking about the hundreds of thousands of people who were in boarding schools in the United States from 1869 to the present. I'm talking about Holocaust survivors. I'm talking about the more than 2 million people currently caught up in the prison system. I'm talking about domestic abuse survivors and incest survivors. It's daunting to know the impact of those images that we take in on those who've been victimized themselves. And most of us are taking those in without even any words to say what that is doing to us. We are running forward without being able to look back. And this is impacting what's going on in the classroom, because students bring this knowledge to varying degrees to the classroom. We bring this to our activist circles. The politics of retaliation since 9/11. Again, psychoanalytic theory helps us, because we're seeing how projection and transference has been occurring. The guilt, the lack of accountability, the unwillingness to take responsibility for why that atrocity occurred has been projected on to people of Arab descent or anybody who looks like they may be of Arab descent. So I have a student in my class who's in her 40s, who has 3 children, who's Puerto Rican of Taino descent, who was surveilled, FBI in front of her house after 9/11, and her children were harassed. She's indigenous, and they thought she was Arab.